What is up? Today is a super special day, guys. I'm not going to waste too much time talking before. Today, we're having Robert J. Hill on. He's a guy that has affected my life and my view on education. After his workshop, I was so much more passionate about doing this podcast and kind of doing whatever I could to bring quality education. And for me, my highest value is just honest education. You know, this whole podcast is about demystifying what it takes to run a small business just in general. And so it was so good to have him on and just kind of dive into some deep topics like depression and not knowing who you are. And Rob tells some really tough stories later on. And at the same time, how do you get out of that and how do you find the best place you can for yourself, and while also running a business, and how to be successful at that and be authentic to yourself. So without any further ado, here's my good friend, Robert Hill. Robert, what's going on, man?
How is it going?
Good, man. It's people don't realize. I mean, this podcast is called The Bearded Talk, but you're also a bearded photographer, so I feel like it's a good mix.
dueling beards unite.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, man. I've wanted to have you on for a long time, and I kind of already talked pre-show, but like this story, I love this story, and I'm sure you've had this happen a lot. You're in the education space, and you do workshops in addition to amazing weddings, destination photography. But I've had a successful business. It's run well the past few years, and was generally, from a numbers perspective, very happy, but from a fulfillment perspective, not as happy as I could be. And I went to your workshop, thinking, this is a great fit. It's in Miami. It's about working less and making more. It's in February, so it's off time. I was like, yeah, and I've heard a lot about this Robert guy. Why not? And I came away, we've talked about this before, I came away with like 2,500 words of notes where I was like, what in the world? And it was just such a good overall reminder of, why we do this. What is your reasoning behind every decision you make as a business? And just, it was a really good touch point that I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs and photographers, even ones who do well, don't receive. And so, yeah, we had to have you on just because that was amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. And it was incredible to have you in Miami too, man. Like, I feel like that was we had a pretty intimate workshop that day, but it felt like a very special day. Like, I feel like we, as a group of strangers coming together for the first time, the depth that we hit that day was, I walked away from that very, very touched. That was some deep stuff that day.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, for the four people who don't know who you are, give me a little bit of background on who you were, and then who you are and who you're becoming. Like, give me the background on Robert Hill.
Oh man, how far back should I go?
As far as you'd like. You can give us horror stories or from the beginning.
Okay. Well, I first picked up a camera, and I'd say a video camera when I was 12 years old. I kind of ran with that for several years, became obsessed. It kind of fell in my lap. Did not expect it to. When I was 15, my dad, who is also a wedding photographer, put a DSLR in my hands. Picked that up pretty quickly. And within about a year, I was like, I can do this. I started a business when I was 16, shooting everything you could imagine in the world of photography, which was great because that allowed me to fail immensely as a teenager. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And after getting taken advantage of a lot and just failing a lot, I ended up putting my camera on the shelf and kind of stepped out of the industry for several years. And then right after my wife and I got married, this was, I'd say in that downtime was when like weddings had exploded and wedding photographers were no longer like the cheesy, disrespected photographers of the photography world. They were like, the weddings were getting very extravagant. They were going outdoors. They were getting in nature and going to the tops of mountains and stuff. And so my wife and I had a I'd just say it was a hippie party in the woods type of wedding. And it was right after that I kind of looked back and went, I could absolutely do this. So I jumped in. I was living in Florida at the time. And although my family lives in Florida, I am originally from Seattle, and I've never felt like Florida was my place. And so it was kind of this constant fight of like, I got to get out of here. So when I started my business, it was focused towards traveling. And I kind of took everything that I had learned from my previous business, as well as what I was doing when I had stepped out of the industry, put it all together, and then things exploded extremely fast, faster than I ever dreamt that they would. And within about a year and a half, I went from small town Florida kid to international wedding photographer. And that was a big thing to chew on for a while. And then from there, it kind of progressed several years. Then my wife and I went and traveled overseas for about 10 months. My second year in business, we just basically sold everything and decided if I was going to do travel weddings, then let's just go and actually travel and do weddings. And so went overseas, shot a ton of stuff, got some great portfolio work, and then ended up moving to the West Coast to Portland, Oregon. Everything deepened even more at that point because I felt like I finally had everything that I wanted to have at my fingertips in terms of nature and the type of people I wanted to work with and stuff. And then from there, it kind of just started this split between I'm a outdoor adventure, like hiking photographer, but at the same time, I'm this travel destination photographer. And I've kind of been going with that ever since. And then all the while picking up education and starting to help other photographers not just realize how to build a business or how to be a photographer, but how to be happy doing that. And I think that there's a lot of conversation that can be said around that. But I think that that's something that is easy to lose track of in terms of, are we doing something that makes us happy, or are we really just doing something that makes us feel good? And I'd say a couple of years ago, I kind of came to this point where everything that I had ever wanted in my career, I had it. And it kind of took the universe sucker punching me to make me realize that from a business standpoint, I had everything I had ever dreamt of, but from a personal and home standpoint, everything was falling apart. And that kind of, I crumbled after that. And it wasn't something that I had ever expected to do, but quickly fell into a pretty deep depression. And over the last several years, it's been slowly starting to build tools and to navigate myself out of that place. And now I'm here.
That I love that, man.
That was the very, very quick, synopsis of that.
That's all right. That's like the photo of the recipe, and then we're gonna dive in and see all the ingredients through other episode. That's awesome. Is there, we'll kind of take that piece by piece, man. But was there a certain photo or client, and I know a lot of us in the industry, we have that. Malcolm Gladwell talks about like the connectors or the mavens, the people who know a lot of people. And was there a certain wedding that helped kind of, kickstart the ferocious rise to international weddings? Or was there, was it just like, what was that kind of tipping point for you at that time?
I'd say that it was probably when we decided to sell everything and move or travel the world for 10 months and shoot weddings. That was the kickstart of it, because my wife and I did 14 countries in 10 months, as well as like all over the States. And so it was an incredibly intense year. And that same momentum, I guess, continued on after that. But once we decided to move to Portland, it was like, all right, now we have a home that we love, but my business is on the other side of the planet. And that wrestling of like, oh my gosh, I love what I do, but I'm missing everything at home, started to come into play. And so I'd say that kickstarted that progression or that momentum. But after about 3 years of that go, it was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. And I had to kind of pull back.
Right. Do you know if there was like just a certain reason, or was there a way, looking back at it now, that you could have maybe gotten to that same result, but in a more healthier way? You know, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like, was there an Instagram photo that blew up and you're like, you get a bunch of inquiries for Iceland and Norway and etc., or was it just kind of this strategic, long, hard road, and then you kind of took everything that sounded fun, and then you were like, you got to that 3-year marker and you're like, oh crap?
Yeah, I've never gone viral. I've never had anything like really blow up or anything like that. It was like just straight up strategy and like pushing and working towards something I really believed in, and something that made me extremely happy. And I think that's where I think that's really what caused the crumble, was that I found so much happiness in my work, but I was losing all of my happiness at home. And I came to this crossroads of going, which are you going to choose? Are you going to choose your home life with your family and your wife and your dog and your cat? Or are you going to continue to, for me, stroke my ego of, trying to be this destination wedding photographer with an Instagram following and do all the things that life at least looks like what it gives you from an online perspective.
Totally. I mean, it's kind of like we've all watched really bad but very interesting like VH1 documentaries on rock stars, and they not saying that your crumbles may be equivalent to anybody's, but it's this story of like this, what would you do if the dog caught the fire engine, and you finally do, and you're like, all right, well, now what? And what happens, and how do I make my life better from this moment? What was there a certain either discussion or moment or a missed moment when that kind of like was the trigger for you saying, oh crap? Or was it kind of okay, yeah, what was that moment, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it was one distinctive moment as much as it was a very quick set of situations or circumstances that hit us in life that pushed me to that moment. And so it was actually, so in 2016, March 2016, my wife and I decided we were going to buy a house. We fell in love with the Northwest and we were like, this is home. Let's go ahead and get a place. And so we went to go buy our house, and our lender, everything was going good. And a few days into the process, our lender came back and basically said, due to the transition you made from the East Coast to the West Coast, your business kind of took a little bit of a dip in terms of financials in that 1 year. And a month from now, so April 15th, tax day, we have to take into consideration last year's taxes. And because of that dip, we basically have to drop your loan by $100,000. And that $100,000 was basically you can't buy a house in inner city Portland because the market here is nuts. And so that was the first thing. And that we essentially had a month to find a house in one of the hottest markets in America. A few days later, my wife, Emily, was, I think she was on a trip, and she had come home, and I had just taken my dog, Indy, for a walk. And we were sitting there cooking dinner and talking about her trip. And then we looked down, and Indy was like extremely lethargic. And didn't think too much of it, but then it just got worse throughout the night. Went to bed, woke up, and she was basically gone, just about. And we had no idea what happened. And so it was immediately like rush to the vet. They had no idea, send us to a specialist. And we basically had, it was $10,000+ over the course of 3 weeks trying to figure out what was the cause of what happened to her, and no one could give us any answers. And it's a very humbling point to get to when you realize how little we know of the human body, nonetheless an animal's body. And when you're sitting there with, for me, my dog is like my best friend in the world. When you're sitting there and you're just like, oh my gosh, like I'm on the brink of losing her, and no one can give me any answers as to why, that was just breaking on top of finding a house. And then that month was also the month that I started my heavy wedding season. So every single weekend I was leaving for 3 to 4 days to go shoot weddings all over the States. And and leaving my wife to handle everything back home. That was the 5 weeks before I was leaving for a 5-week trip to Europe to go shoot weddings and some elopements and engagement sessions, all in Europe and Iceland and the East Coast. And that was about a month and a half before my wife was leaving to go to Bali for 8 weeks for yoga teacher training. So essentially that was the month before we left and basically didn't see each other for several months because we were on the opposite side of the planet from one another. And it was on that trip that I was in Europe shooting. I just shot an unbelievable wedding with actually a wedding photographer in Austria, his wedding. And I was in Germany heading to Iceland. And as I was sitting in Germany, I was just like, oh, this is so amazing. Like, what should I do next? And I'm in this coffee shop, like thinking through everything. And it hit me in that moment that everything I had ever dreamt of doing and being and seeing and whatnot years ago living in Florida, like I was there, I was already doing it. But the amount of stress and anxiety that came with that due to the fact that I had zero balance in my life. I did not know who my wife was. I mean, we didn't communicate very much. We didn't really, like, in terms of growth, it was non-existent at that point, because my business started our first year of marriage and it was like immediately 0 to 60. And that was the point. It was in that coffee shop in Germany that I felt like I broke. And then from there, I had to make it through the next 6 to 8 months of still traveling the world and doing all of this stuff while she was traveling and trying to find some bit of connection with her throughout the process. And then at the end of the year, the election happened, cherry on the cake. And it was after that, man, it's just been literally fighting to figure things out, to find balance, to find, what really does make me happy, not from what strokes my ego, but instead what fulfills me in life.
What does it look like now? Like, what, not even just business, business stuff, we'll get to that, but like, what are some personal things now that you have either taken up, or rules or boundaries you've given yourself that help provide that fulfillment? Or you even feel like you're still finding that, but what's something that's gotten close for you?
I think that, I don't know, a few things. For me, I always had, and it feels weird even kind of talking about this because there's so many things, especially in going through depression. There's a lot of times where you can feel very alone and like nobody understands you, and you're just like existing in your own world type of thing. But I never had a ton of friends in the industry. Like, this industry has always been a little bit of a fascinating one for me, just from the standpoint of social media is kind of where everyone exists, and social media calls everyone friends. Yet you don't really know many people, or at least I didn't. I didn't have very deep friendships, I would say, with people. It was more just like surface level business. Like, I communicated, back and forth, but it wasn't anything where I was finding growth, or I wasn't being challenged by people and that sort of thing. And so I say that was probably a big one, is starting to find the people that I related to in the industry. And that's kind of been an interesting process of just, to do that. It really requires you to start opening up and sharing some things that are inside you that you think people won't understand. So, I mean, that's one. I'd definitely say above everything, like finding balance on the personal front, opening that communication with my wife. And I feel like in this entire process, man, like I've learned something, not about just being a business person or being just a photographer, but I've learned a depth of marriage that I never imagined. I never knew like this is what marriage was, when I jumped in to getting married, my wife and I wouldn't say that at the time we really knew each other or even really knew who we were. I mean, we did at the time to the degree that we did, but now it's like looking back, you're like, oh my gosh, the depth that we have gone now is so much greater than where we were. So it's kind of weird looking back, but finding balance and opening up a very honest communication pathway for my wife and I, and having her kind of help me be accountable to that as well, on the business front of like, are you taking on too much? Why are you really doing what you're doing? I think that's the biggest question that we ask all the time. We like to question everything. So yeah, I would say finding balance, finding people that relate with me. And then in that too, I found a lot of healing through just education, like towards reading and consuming knowledge, about what it is that I'm going through, but also the tools of how to not have to deal with that. And so for me, that's kind of been towards the realm of yoga and meditation and peace, mindfulness, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I'd say those are probably the three biggest things I could say off the top of my head.
Do you feel like, have you seen, especially one, just through trying to meet other photographer friends and make friends in the industry, like I've been in a similar place where, we make these businesses most likely, we're building an island and everybody tells you no man is an island, and it's kind of prescriptive to, hey, don't be an island. And, either way we become that. And there's a situation where from a business standpoint, you don't necessarily have somebody to vent to or ask questions or bounce ideas off of. And you don't necessarily want to use like a spouse or a close friend for that. And I think, at least for me, that's been my biggest issue is like, I'm trying to, I think probably in the next year, I'll probably try and create or start or join like a mastermind, just to not even to gain knowledge on the practical side, but just, a mutual venting club or mutual, admiration and just figuring things out together club. But have you noticed that, you're not the only one that has kind of gone through depression? Like there is lots of photographers where I feel like it's a huge secret and nobody talks about it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's just like this thing where our job is like happiness and we don't want to be Debbie Downers.
Yeah.
And it's just like, but what if we could do it? Kind of changing gears just a little bit, just to try and keep you happy for some people who are riding in their cars or whatever.
Yeah.
What is
I'm downing everybody right now.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Tell me about, you wrote this book, and this was like one of the first things I found when I found you, Poser, and one, wrote a book, two, gave it away, and that to me, like I joke with me as far as my like branch of education, like the bearded tog is my tip of the spear. I feel like Poser is your tip of the spear. Tell me more about that. Was that written kind of during that time that you were like rediscovering yourself, and what are some of the things you learned like through writing that, and what's the purpose of that?
Yeah. The one thing that I have, the one thing that I feel like I've learned in the world of business since starting all of this is, and I think this does absolutely tie into everything I've been dealing with even, is how key relationships are to what we do. And it's a little bit sad because I definitely feel and sense that, or at least I did when I was like really ingrained in the social media world. It feels a lot of times like social media, although it's a very positive thing, it's an incredible tool. It can also be like this festering, like place for negativity and cynicism. And I feel like I also have seen a lot of cynicism come about in the industry around this topic of relationships, is that people start talking about them and they're like, yeah, whatever. But I don't know, when I think about business, when I think about what it is that we're doing, I always come down to a question that and this is a question that I always ask myself, but I then in turn ask it to other people. And it's, do you care about money or do you care about people? And I think that those are two things on opposite sides of the spectrum. They're two polarizing things. And it's not that you should not care about one and only care about the other. That's definitely not what I'm saying, because we all live in a society where we have to make money. We have to pay our bills and exist, right? But I think it's more of the intent towards what we do. Is it more about let's try and get rich and make money, or is it more about we're here to impact people's lives? And I'd say in my own experience, that is, although so simple to be just said, the depth of that is where I have found the greatest gap between photographers who become extremely successful. And I don't mean successful by just financially, but successful by fulfillment, and photographers who really just make bank. And maybe also on that side of the spectrum, I think it also pertains to the photographers that maybe struggle to break out of a certain price point, or, really grow in how do I go from shooting 30, 40, 50 weddings to shooting 15 to 20 weddings? If that's what you wanted to do, but how do you make that be very profitable? And I think the conversation between the two really comes down to how much value you create for people. And it's hard to create value that's deep for people when your focus is just, I'm here to make money. And so I wrote the book because I found that there's things that for me in business, it's kind of just been a natural thing for me to kind of jump in with people. I've always been the person who can kind of go to a party and just like get in conversation with people and just be very honest and very vulnerable. I love one-on-one settings. And so when I jumped into wedding photography, it was kind of the same thing with wedding clients. Is my vulnerability easily comes out when I'm with clients, because like I'm trying to connect with them. I'm trying to get to a place where they feel incredibly comfortable with me. So I wrote Poser as kind of an intro to what I do with photographers through mentorship and whatnot, which is a very long process of covering every aspect of business, but how you do that through the standpoint of creating value for people. And so it covers the business side of things, but then I also break down my entire like posing method, and how those two things come hand in hand. The amount of or the level of comfortability that we can get a couple to when we take them out to shoot really determines how amazing of images we can make, or at least authentically make, I would say, because it's easy to walk out and be like, here, just go run that way and like laugh, and we can possibly get a shot. But I feel like there's a depth, there's an emotion that people can see in imagery that can't be fabricated, that has to just be cultivated through that connection between the photographer and the client. And so I basically break down like, this is what business can look like if you are very intentional and you seek to build those relationships with clients. But then once you get to the creative side of things, it really is the exact same formula that you're using for both.
That was so much. I feel like people's minds are exploding right now, including my own. And I've heard this before. It's just a good reminder and enforcement. I feel the industry, or I would say the slice of pie from the industry that at least in the education world, that I think was just kind of presented to me. You start following one person, you follow next, and you kind of start following this theme. Like, ironically, the most photographers that I've learned from or gotten education from are, ironically light and airy, when that's not my style at all. Right. And, but that's kind of the education that I've just seen or pursued. And, I can name those people, and they're great. They're awesome. But, oftentimes when you hear about adding value, it's very much this like supplemental thing versus where what you just said is it's from start to end, and the process. And like, if somebody was going to tell you to add value, maybe they talk about like client gifts or showering their couple with love, which is great. And, people who have that personality and want to do that, that's awesome. But like, there's so much more to kind of what you said. And can you name like one or two differences that how you can create that value, just in the sense that through that relationship, if you will, it's not just through a gift, it's not through that kind of surface level stuff. How do you do that, if you will?
I would say it starts with, and I'm even scared to say this because of the the cynicism that could come with it. But I think it starts with building a very authentic brand, a very authentically unique brand. And that I think is probably, although most of us wouldn't want to admit it, I think that's probably the greatest problem that I see happening in the wedding photography industry. I heard somebody say recently something that just fascinated me, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. And they said an industry is never saturated unless everyone is doing the same thing. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is why we're stuck. This is why wedding photography has become a commodity. It's no longer like the depth of meaning behind what we do is to a degree lost. And I know like this could even be striking up a ton of emotions for different people who may be listening to this. And so I mean this with really good intentions, but I think that the mindset of go, like hustle, take on as much as you can, like shoot 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 weddings a year. Some people like that. Some people want that. And that's totally cool. Like I have no beef for anybody who wants that. I think the bigger question is why. Like, why do you want that? But two, what kind of impact can you really make for those people? Because when you have that many clients, everybody has different capacities, of course, but when you have that many clients, it's almost, it's unless you have your entire business outsourced and like all you're doing is building relationships, it's impossible to build 50 relationships with technically 100 people. If you have bride and groom or groom and groom or bride and bride, like 100 relationships throughout a year, 100 different energies that you're having to like manage and grow in and understand and connect with. Like that's so much. I think that's a big thing that's happening, is that we are all doing something very similar to one another. And because of that, not a ton of people stand out. So I'd say building a very authentic brand, which there's an immense amount that comes with that. The other side of the coin would be really getting out of yourself and really starting to not seek to know people, not seek to be friends with your clients as much as you seek to understand your clients. And I think that right there has been a huge thing for me throughout this entire journey of being a business owner. Is I can easily become friends with clients, right? We can stay surface level. We can talk about just like the things that we, really connect on, like, oh, you like hiking. I like hiking. Awesome. But where I have found the real impact, the real depth, the real value that has come with me and other people I've gotten to work with, both on the wedding side and especially on the mentoring side, because that's a whole nother ballgame of long-term relationships with people. But I think the depth of getting to understand people and digging into some questions that maybe aren't talked about a lot, digging into some topics that maybe are avoided publicly. But once you get into that one-on-one setting, it's like, let's just talk rather than I'm a photographer and you're my client. Let's just talk human to human, because you have an entirely different life experience than me. And that's something that I can learn from. And if I can dig down to the point where I can be vulnerability breeds vulnerability. If I can be vulnerable, you more than likely are going to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, we're going to build an immense amount of trust with one another. And I think that for me, it's less of like, let's think of the facts and figures of how much I've gotten to be friends with my clients and think about the emotional depth I've gone with them. Because from there, if you can truly get a client to trust you, and I don't mean trust you like, tell us where to go stand on the mountaintop and we'll go do it, as much as it's trust you like, I truly trust you as another human, that I could trust you with things outside of this photo shoot. There's a value, there's an energy that's created at that point that I found to be incredibly powerful for my business.
Is there, I mean, there's so much here.
I know.
Is there something you see in the education space, you know, as you're meeting with students and other photographers that, you know, you meet with a range, you meet from people who are kind of starting out and say, hey, I want to go to education. Hey, there's this guy, there's a workshop, let's go, to folks like me who, you know, even in our meetings and discussions, there's I feel like in your education, you help people to be more authentic. Like, hey, like, one, your clients are probably hiring you for you, or at least your favorite clients are. And like, do that more. Do the thing that makes you you. And it's almost like the ideal, like I feel like if I was, at least for me, in my most authentic space, being one with my business wouldn't be as difficult as it is. Whereas now it's this overthought thing where I'm like battling, you know, what I show and what I don't show personally versus saying, Adam, like, show what your heart wants to show.
Yeah.
Both work and personality wise.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found throughout all of this process, especially in wrestling with depression and stuff, everybody in the entire world has shame. We all have shame around various different areas in life. For me, I have found, like, in getting into a relationship with somebody, digging back, and for myself, ripping out and throwing it on the table so that hopefully they would do the same, ripping all the way back into like childhood and like what has happened to you, and like everything that we have experienced in our lives up to this point is dictating why we are the way we are up to this point. And so I think that through my journey, I have found how much shame I hold, and the only way to combat shame is through vulnerability. There's a really incredible book by Brene Brown called Daring Greatly that really dives into that. But it's fascinating when you step outside of the image of who you are and you go, wait, who am I really? Like, how do I dig into the depths of my soul to figure out who I authentically am and find confidence in that, to be able to do that within my business? Because that's that other thing that I feel like, again, I could talk for years about why I believe this all came to be, like why business has for centuries been so much about money rather than about people. But way back in the day, like I always reverse back to like indigenous cultures. Within a village, different people had different skills, and that's like who they were. It was like they had a gift, and everybody had a gift that together they helped each other, and they had a community. With the rise of population of the planet, and with the differences in societies and cultures and everything around the world, we then threw currency in, and now it's all about money. And I think that that's where we have decided that our businesses, and I want to really like dive into just photographers right here, because photographers are individuals who are trying to be artists, yet they don't want to be fully themselves in their businesses. They want to let their business exist outside of themselves. I found that when those two things are fully connected and energetically they are flowing, balanced, with balance, everything works as it should. And in that, the value that comes with that is so much greater. Yeah. Again, I feel like it could go everywhere right there.
Totally, man. No, I love it. We need to have like a whole series of just Adam and Robert. I'll just keep pulling on the string that is, everything you've learned. But I mean, it's something too that I've been going through that in the current state, and I'm in the process of figuring that out. And I think people do that when, like I know photographers who quote unquote rebrand like every year, every 11 months, every 12 months.
Oh yeah. Totally.
And to me, that's like, no, for me, and not to degrade or denounce like anybody's personal story. But for me, like if I actually went through the full rebrand that I would want to do and should do, obviously, it's like, it would almost be like a coming out party for me,
Oh, it
personally.
definitely is.
It definitely is. And that's terrifying, right? Like,
It
that's
is.
absolutely terrifying, because before then, at least for me, I've always run my brand like, hey, my brand is a different icon. It's not my face.
Well, and I
And
think even with that though, man, like I've thought about that a lot over the last several years of just like, why is it Photographers Rebrand so often? And I think that there's something really beautiful about it though. And I think the beautiful part is that people are realizing a deeper part of who they are. And they get to this point where they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not who I am now. I need to do it again.
yeah,
And I don't think that there is an immense amount of education out there that really helps people dive into the depths of that.
right.
And yeah, I think that's what causes it. I think that's the constant, like, oh, I've got to change again. And we're all going to continuously change. We're all going to continuously evolve and grow. It's not like you can just all of a sudden get it right the first time. But I think there is something to, if you're willing to dig in and dive into the depths of who you are and pull that out and put that into your business, it will at least expand the gaps between those rebrands immensely.
Right. And it makes sense too with the rebrands. It's like every rebrand represents a lesson learned, and they're like, oh, I need to add this into my life and show this that I've learned this, or this is who I'm becoming. Oh man. One last question just for fun, because I feel like we're going to go forever, is now you're doing mentorship and education. Tell me more about that. Tell me more. What does that look like for you now? Why is that so fulfilling for you? And, what do you think is the biggest thing missing in the education in photography today?
Oh man, that's such a big question.
Those are the only kind of questions we ask here, Robert. Those are the only kind of questions we ask.
Okay, so I'll start with this. I found that there's kind of two different ways of going about business. One way, and I'd say this is more the traditional way, is like this more specialist route where you're like, all right, I'm going to be a wedding photographer and I'm only going to shoot weddings. I'm going to even shoot these specific types of weddings. And for that although that is a route for success, it is one that takes an immense amount more time because it's dictated by consistency over a long period of time to build trust with people that you'll actually live up to what you say that you'll do. So route one is specialize, niche down, and run for a long time, really hard, work a lot. You will eventually make a lot, but you're going to work a lot for it. The other route is the route of taking a more authentic route and a route that's focused on intention. I would say it's a much harder route at first, but it is a much faster route for success and fulfillment, because rather than saying, I'm just going to specialize down and be surface level and I'm going to do this for a long period of time to get to where I want to get, maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't, because after 5 years of being in weddings and you're just killing yourself to make it work, most people don't make it. The other route is dig down into your soul, pull that out, be very authentic, find really great educators to help you do that. And in turn, learn how to be vulnerable with people and create value and watch that success come much faster. For me, I thought that my plan of doing everything I wanted to do in this industry was a 10-year long plan, and it happened in 2.5 years. And sure, we're all different people. Maybe I did something that was just more natural to me than what other people would do. But for me, when I hit that point, yes, I crumbled. But at the same time, I was sitting there going, like, I can't even put into words how different of a person I was 5-6 years ago compared to who I am now. And it was really because of my business and the relationships I've built with people through that. And so, two routes of business. With all of my mentoring and with my workshops and stuff, I lean into the route of intention. I lean into the route of rip out your soul. I'm not going to tell you surface level things to do, because there's basic things of business, like reply quickly and like do what you say you're going to do. And all of these things that are like business 101, go to Creative Live, go take, a basic business course and you're going to learn these things. The other route is a much harder route to go. I've even wrestled with the terminology work less, make more. I'm wrestling with that right now. I like my community, my people that are around me, like we're all in discussion about this, because the idea of work less, make more from a initial, like, no one's ever seen it and they see it, they immediately don't trust it because it's counterintuitive. It's like a paradox. But I'm wrestling with it because I don't feel like it taps into the depth of what it is that I really believe, and that I'm finding a lot of other people believe. And so I do the mentoring thing. That's a lot of fun. I find an immense amount of fulfillment in that, because for me, education is not about come to a workshop and I'm going to just puke on you with information for the next 10 hours and then that be it. As much as I want to start a long-term relationship and like dig deeper with you. So the mentoring side, I'm doing that. I'm also starting to do a lot of collaborations with other photographers who I've built deep relationships with. Some of them have gone through my mentorship. Some of them have just been like, we've started up conversations randomly and somehow got very deep very quickly. And so I'm starting to do collaboration projects where I can kind of take my background in video production and photography and branding and design and stuff and start to kind of throw that out there as a tool that I can kind of partner with another educator and elevate them in the industry. Because that's ultimately what I think all of this comes down to, is like, if you go at business with, I'm here not to take, but rather to give. And I'm here to help you, like lift you up and raise you up rather than like put you down by raising myself up. I find that the universe works as it should from there forward. And so, yeah, man, I'm doing a lot of different things with education, mentorship, collaboration projects, kind of toying back and forth with the workshop thing, because I feel like workshops you can only go so far in a day with people, and it's beneficial, but I also don't want to just give people information and then be lost afterwards. So, I've started really leaning into, I do this year-long mentorship, but I also do one-on-one long-term mentorships. And so that's been kind of a recent change that I made. I was having a lot of people that were coming in and they were like, I want to understand pricing. And my kickback was like, okay, tell me about your brand. And they're like, I have no idea what my brand is. And I'm like, okay, like there's a disconnect here, because for you to be able to ask really high prices to somebody, there's gotta be something else behind that. There's got to be the value that comes with that high price point behind it. So let's back up and reset. So, yeah, things are going well, man. I'm really excited for kind of what all is happening in the education world right now. I think that people are starting to wake up to this. Not just this philosophy, but also just the fact that like we can't live in this surface level world. We need more depth to what it is that we're doing. And so, yeah.
I love it, man. And just as somebody who's attended a workshop and now, is a big fan of you and has also used your mentorship services and is looking forward for the opening of the 2019 mentorship, I think if you can, and if it's sustainable financially and personally, like your workshops are so good, man. It's like if anything, it is just the icebreaker, but that means that anything that follows after that is in the depths, man, and it's getting there, man. I loved it. It was breaking a plateau. So I definitely, if you can, keep doing it. And it was so fun because it was a workshop where we never took a photo once, other than a group photo. Like
that was definitely the key. Like no cameras, let's just talk. Like let's really dive in.
Yeah, it's all ethereal. We don't care about f-stops. We don't care about anything like that. We're gonna dive in. Awesome, man. Well, dude, where can people find you? Where is the best place for people to grab Poser and learn more about education and just everything that you've said so far, man? It's been awesome having you on. Yeah, man.
My website's robertjhill.com. I'm currently working on a separate education site because I'm definitely in this season where I'm like, that has to get off of my wedding website. And so currently it's still there though. So robertjhill.com, there's an education tab at the top. There's actually a link right there to be able to grab Poser if you're a reader. And yeah, Instagram is at Robert J. Hill Photography. Don't be afraid to shoot me a message. Like I'm here to talk. So
awesome, man. I love it, dude. Have a wonderful day, man. It was so great chatting with you.
Thanks, man.
Something that Robert spoke about during our talk was that he had reached the place where I have wanted to go, where so many of you I know through your DMs and just the episodes that have the most plays on them are all about this attractive travel situation in our business, essentially. And we long for that destination. We long to be valued through what we're doing. And traveling is not wrong. Shooting is not wrong. Photographing people in different nations is not wrong. But you have to analyze your why. And that's something I'm still wrestling with. That's something that Robert has helped me and helps a lot of others work through. And I'm so glad he could just give us a little taste of his insight today. Drop into the show notes and say hi. His Instagram's linked there. A link to Poser. His book is there. He's just a great guy. He's another bearded guy that you could trust to talk to. He's absolutely amazing. And he's been through so much. You know, there's not much that you couldn't ask him about that he wouldn't either have some insight on or just wouldn't want to learn more about you through. So he's always around to talk. He's awesome. Thanks so much. Keep being awesome, guys.